Let's write some JSX. To write and test our JSX code, we need a React application. If you have already created a React application using create React app, then use that. Otherwise, create a new React application using the following command: npx create React app and followed by the name of the application. Here I am giving app2 as my application name. You can give any application name you want. Once this command finishes, cd into that folder. In this case, it's app2. And once you are in that folder, type npm space start. So I'm going to type npm start, and that should start your development server. And a new tab will open in your browser with localhost 3000. Next, let us open our React application in Visual Studio Code. So go to Visual Studio Code and click on Open Folder over here and open your React Projects folder. Once you open your folder, you can see something like this. You can close the welcome page if you want. Next, expand the source folder and double click on app.js. You can find app.js within the src folder. So double click on that and that should open app.js for you. Within app.js, you can find a function called app. Remove everything within that function. We will write everything from scratch. So I have removed everything now and it's completely blank. Let's look at what we are going to implement. This is the UI that we are going to implement. We have a heading at the top. Please log in. It is underlined. And then we have a label, username, and a text box. And we have a password label and a text box. So this is what we are going to implement. Our function app should return JSX. So let us write a return statement and open the brackets. We need a heading with the text, please log in. So let's write that. Let's use h2 and let us put in some text, please log in. And then we need a label called username. So let's write that, label. And we need a text box. So let's write that, input. Let's give it an ID of username. And we need a password label. So let's create a password label. And we need a password text box. So let's create a password text box as well. ID equal to password and type equals password. As you can see, VS Code is trying to warn us something. Let's hover over this red squiggly line. It says that JSX expressions must have one parent element. If you remember, I mentioned this as the first point that we have to remember about JSX. So let's have one root element over here. Let's place everything within a div and let us close the div tag also. So everything is now within one root element, this div tag over here, and the warnings have gone away. Let's look at the output now. Let's go to localhost 3000 and you can see our output over here. Let me mention one quick point about the root element. Instead of this div, you can also specify an empty tag over here like this and close with an empty tag as well. This syntax is also valid. Let's see if it works. As you can see, it still works. But let us use div as a root element in this case. Going back to our wireframe, we can see that everything is centered, while in our React application, it is not centered right now. So let's center it. If you open app.css, which is over here within the src folder, you can see that there is a class already called app to align things to the center. So let's use that. Let's specify this class app to this div over here. This is when we have to remember that we are writing JSX and we have to use the class name prop. So let's give class name equals app and let's look at the output. As you can see, everything is centered now. Let's place a break tag between our username and password. So I'm going to place a break tag and now our React application is looking more like our wireframe. Let us specify tab indexes for both of these input fields. So let's specify tab index, tab, and we have to use the JavaScript property name, which is tab index in camel case. VS Code will prompt us for that. So we can just use the autocomplete feature to get that. And let me specify a value of 1 for username and let me do the same for password. Let's use autocomplete and let me specify 2 for password. Also, let us tie this label of username with this input field of username. The way to do that is we use the for attribute typically, but we have to remember that we are writing JSX, so we have to use the JavaScript property of for, and that is HTML for. Let's do the same for password as well. So label HTML, we can use the autocomplete HTML for equals and password. So let's test that. If you click on the username label, the username input field will get focus. Similarly, if you click on the password label, the password input box will get focus. Now let us quickly talk about embedding expressions in JSX. Let us put this string in a variable called s, and like we discussed, if we want to embed s within JSX over here, we have to use the curly braces and specify s. Let's do that. Let's look at the output. As you can see, it works. Also for these tab indexes over here, let us convert this 1 into an integer. So let us specify the curly braces and let us specify 1 within the curly brace. So we are not passing in a string over here. Now we are passing in an integer. Let's do the same for passwords tab index as well. I'm converting the string 2 into an integer, and we have placed the curly braces around that integer. So at this point we have 3 expressions over here. We have s embedded over here, and we have 1 embedded over here, and we have 2 embedded over here. Let's say we want to have a subheading and we want to get the text within that subheading from a function. Let's say we have a function called get subheading, and it is a function that takes in no parameters, and it just returns the subheading which says welcome back. And let's say we want to have the subheading within h3 over here. So we have to use the curly braces and we have to specify the get subheading like this, and we have to call it and specify it like this. So please observe that I have called the get subheading function within the curly braces over here. Let's change that to h5 and the output looks a little better. But the main point to note is that we have embedded a function call within the curly braces over here. So please remember that anything we place within curly braces in JSX will get evaluated and embedded within JSX. So this is JSX here. Within JSX, if curly braces are encountered, then expressions within the curly braces are evaluated. Let us mark our expressions that are being evaluated. So we have embedded an integer expression over here and another integer expression over here. Then we have embedded a string expression over here, and we have embedded a function call over here. Similarly, we can have objects also embedded within these curly braces. So let's look at an example for that. Let's say I want to add a custom attribute to my username input field. So let me call that my attribute, my attr equals. I have to use the curly braces to indicate that I want to evaluate this JSX expression, and JavaScript objects are represented by curly braces again. So we will end up with 2 curly braces in the beginning and 2 curly braces at the end. So I'm going to just specify a:1, and now I have embedded an object within my JSX code. Let's see if that works. As you can see, there are no errors and it works. Now let us tackle our last remaining requirement, which is to underline our heading. To underline our heading, we have to use CSS, and we have to use text-decoration with a value of underline. So to our h2 tag, we have to say style equals text-decoration, and we have to specify the value of underline. Let's save that and see if it works. If you reload the page, you can see that there is an error. It says the style prop expects mapping from style properties to values, not a string. And it also gives us an example. For example, style equals double curly braces and then margin right and spacing plus em and then closing double curly braces. So let's do that. So what we have to do is we have to specify this as an object in JSX. So first let me remove the double quotes. Let me specify the opening curly brace to indicate that this is an expression that needs to be evaluated. Let me also place it at the end. And next, we have to specify this as a JavaScript object. So this needs to be a key value pair. So this needs to be an object. And this is the kebab case. So we have to convert this into camel case to get the JavaScript property. So I'm going to do that. So this is now a JavaScript property, and this looks like an object, but the value has to be a string. So let me place single quotes around the underlined word. Now we have converted this into an object. The key is text decoration in camel case, and the value is a string called underline. Let me remove the space at the beginning and at the end. And so now we have embedded an object as well in our JSX code. Please remember that the first curly brace is to indicate that this is an expression that needs to be evaluated by JSX, and the second curly brace is to indicate that this is a JavaScript object. Let us quickly mark which pieces in this JSX code are different from HTML. So the first difference is this class name prop. In HTML we would have written class, but in JSX we have to write class name in camel case. And next is our style. We have to specify our style as an object within curly braces. So we'll end up with double curly braces in the beginning and double curly braces at the end. And in between we have to specify the style attributes as key value pairs. We have also embedded a function call in our JSX, and then instead of the for attribute, we have specified the HTML for prop, which is the corresponding JavaScript property of for. Similarly, we needed to specify tab index using the camel case notation, and we have one more HTML for and one more tab index over here. Let's say we forget some of these rules, and let's say instead of class name we write class. So let me change class name to class, and let me save that, and let me go back to the web page and see if it works. As you can see, the example is still working. However, let us look at the browser console. Let's right click and click on inspect, and we should see the browser developer tools come up. Let's click on console, and you can see that we have a warning over here. Invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? Let's change this back to class name and see if that warning goes away. If you clear the previous warning and reload the page, you can see that the warning goes away. Let's change that back to class and see if the warning comes up again. And as you can see, the warning comes up again. The important point to note here is that the code is still working. All we are getting is a warning in the browser console, but everything is working fine. Let us do the same for a couple of the other attributes. So let me change HTML for to for, and let me go back to the page. As you can see, we are getting another warning for as well, but the code is still working. The output has remained the same. Let's quickly discuss why this code is still working even though it's giving us warnings. There's a blog post on reactjs.org by Dan Abramov, and it's titled DOM Attributes in React 16. In that he says that in the past, that means prior to React 16, React used to ignore unknown DOM attributes. So if we specified custom attributes like this, these used to be stripped off, as you can see over here. So React 15's output would be this, but in React 16, such attributes are preserved. So basically, the change is that since React 16, any unknown attributes will end up in the DOM. If React does not recognize something, it will still send it to the DOM like this. So what is happening here is it does not recognize class or for. So it thinks that these are custom attributes and it passes them through to the DOM. But it does give us helpful warning messages in the browser developer tools in console to help us to fix our code. That is why we see these warning messages, but we also see that this code works just fine and the HTML rendered is also just fine. In the blog post, Dan Abramov also says, note that you should still use the canonical React naming for known attributes. So if we want to use tab index, we should still use tab index like this and not like this. We'll get a warning and the code will work, but this is still not the recommended way. This is still the recommended way.